Hello, and thanks for tuning in to another episode of The Director's Cut, brought to you by the Directors Guild of America, where each episode we bring you a fresh and insightful interview featuring one of the film industry's top directors, conducted by one of their peers. Take a second to subscribe to our podcast on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. This episode takes us behind the scenes of director Paul Schrader's new drama, First Reformed. The film tells the story of Reverend Ernst Toller, a former military chaplain who is now the parish pastor of a small Dutch Reformed church in upstate New York. Struggling with the death of his son, who he encouraged to enlist in the armed forces, he finds his faith further challenged after a pregnant parishioner asks him to counsel her husband, a radical environmentalist who doesn't want to bring a child into a world he believes is doomed. In addition to First Reformed, Mr. Schrader's directorial credits include the feature films Blue Collar, Hardcore, American Gigolo, Cat People, The Canyons, and Dog Eat Dog, the documentary feature Venice 70, Future Reloaded, and the movie for television Witch Hunt. After a recent screening of the film at the DGA Theater in New York, Mr. Schrader spoke with director John Patrick Shanley about filming First Reformed. During their discussion, Mr. Schrader talks about how spirituality in cinema has always been a key theme for him, knowing when to break your own rules and when not to, and how he believes that the last scene of a film should continue to play out on the sidewalk outside the theater.
I'm going to start by saying a few things, and then I'll start to bother you. The sobriety and somberness of this film, the uncompromising nature of that foursquare camera and that overcast sky and the lack of score and the opening and the withholding, the Calvinist withholding of any sign of pleasure or hedonism or anything but a complete sticking with the subject is incredibly admirable, and ultimately, if that's what the whole film was, I would think a somewhat sterile exercise. But the moment when her hair falls over his face is, before they even levitate, it took my breath away. And I had every hope that the film engendered in me as an audience member and as an artist, the hope, which I know is something that your work has everything to do with, of transcendence in ever unexpected ways. You're a perverse filmmaker. You're try to torture us and try to make it hard for us, but you know that's a worthy, very worthy journey. And I was shocked and unexpectedly moved by the final 10 minutes of the film. I just and things before that as well. But there is a burden that you, and a pain that I feel you carry, and you dramatize the way that you might be relieved of that burden and of that pain, which has to do with some kind of catharsis having to do with love and acceptance and suffering, sort of in a fireball all at the same time. So, first of all, I have to say that I really admired the writing in this film. I thought it was really good and really stuck with it, and very, deeply uncompromising. And how did you come to write it?
Thank you, John. I've known John for some time. Thank you for doing this. When I was a young film critic, I wrote a book on spirituality in cinema. And I realized that there was a kind of bridge from my sacred past in the seminary and the profane present in Los Angeles, and it was a bridge of style. And I wrote a book about that, which I've now rewritten and is coming out in a week. I never thought that was me as an artist. I was just too intoxicated by action and empathy and sex and violence, and these are not in the Transcendental Toolkit. And so I just said, anybody who tries to connect that book with my films is wrong. I'm not that guy. I'm never going to make that film. And then about 3 years ago, I was giving an award to Paweł Pawlowski for Ida. And we started talking about spirituality and cinema and about the new economics of filmmaking. And I walked uptown afterward, and I said to myself, it's time. You're going to be 70 next year. It's time to write that movie you swore you would never write. And once I sort of made that decision and started revisiting films that worked in this way, on the austere side, the durational side, it started coming quite quickly. It's one of those old stories. It took me, 50 years to prepare for and 2 months to write.
And just looking back over the body of your work, I have a sort of bigger question which pertains to this film too. It's like, how far along are you in your concept when you go into pre-production? When you start talking to the art director, production designer?
Depends who the collaborator is. In this case, I knew everything had to be spare. And so basically I start the conversation by saying, if it moves, take it away. And I had a very young crew. I had picked up this crew from when I did a film called Dog Eat Dog, which was a gonzo kind of a profane, Tarantino-esque bit of vulgar violence. And I kept them on for this, but I knew this kind of style. I knew how it worked, and so I knew that what you had to do in terms of all these withholding devices, which you mentioned. Movies are so needy and desperate for your love. They will do anything. They grab you by the lapels and they show you some pretty girls and some fast cars, and they play music to tell you how to feel all the time. And we're so used to movies being hungry for us that it gets interesting when a movie starts working the other way, when it starts leaning away from you. When you get interested and all the movie starts receding and saying, I'm not going to give it to you. You got to keep coming. You got to keep coming. And that is all done through a whole series of withholding devices. Different directors use them in different proportions, and there's about 8 or 10 of them that you use. One you mentioned, the lack of music, and the long take, the planimetric composition, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. Because I know, now, what was that movie you did with James Coburn?
Affliction.
I feel like this is the grandson of Affliction.
Yeah, but of course, Affliction is very psychological. Mm-hmm. And this is quite cryptic, And Affliction is a kind of flesh and blood movie, and this is a kind of flesh and bone movie. Mm-hmm. I just thought that up. That's kind of good.
Well, should I open it up for questions, or is that a good thing to do?
Well, maybe I'd just throw one other thing in, which is that this film is very satisfying to me. The reaction we've received so far is, unlike anything I've had before. So hopefully it'll do well when it comes out on Friday. In March of 1969, I was a film critic for the LA Free Press in Los Angeles. And I went to a screening in the morning, on Tuesday morning, on Los Feliz Theater. And I saw A Pickpocket, a film by Robert Bresson. And in that 75 minutes, two things happened. One is I saw a connection between the sacred and the profane, and this connection of this bridge of style. There is a bridge of style. And eventually that became the book, Transcendental Style. But the other thing that I sensed in that moment was that there would be a place for me as an artist. Up to that point, I'd been a critic. I had a very elitist view of criticism. We were actually better than film artists, and we would tell you when you made something good. And I was a protege of Pauline Kael's, and but I looked at this movie, and I said, I could make a movie like that. I was living in a house with 4 other UCLA film students, and they were all making a biker film for Roger Corman called Naked Angels. And I just thought they were so déclassé. And they probably felt the same of me. And I looked at this film, and I said, I could do that. He writes in his journal, then he goes out and steals some stuff. Then he comes back and he writes some more. Then he goes out and talks to the girl who lives the floor below him. And then he comes back and writes some more. I said, I could make that movie. And 2 years later, I wrote Taxi Driver, which is that movie. And I've periodically returned to that movie over the years as the events of my life ebb and flow. So he was lonely, he was a taxi driver, he was narcissistic, and he was a gigolo, he was anxious, and he was a drug dealer, he was superficial, and he was a society walker, and now he's in despair, and he's a reverend. And so in that theater, 2 seeds dropped in a petri dish, and it took 50 years for the seed of taxi driver to come around and meet the seed of Bresson.
Yeah.
And that's why I am intimidated by this film, because I really feel a sense of completion.
It's wonderful the way it ends. I know. So I actually heard somebody in the audience go, "What happened? The best part was just about to happen." And I thought, yeah, no, the best part belongs to me. And I like that, and that this person is saved by love, the exonerating power of acceptance and love.
Well, I've always felt that the last scene of a film should play on the sidewalk in front of the theater. That 2 people walk out, one says to the other, blah, blah, and the other person says no. Now they're walking to their car, and the movie is still playing in their heads. What percentage, if you thought he was alive at the end, raise your hand. No one thought, there's one person. You thought he was alive.
I did.
But no one else, everyone else thought. What?
8.
Oh, 8. Because it's meant to be read either way. Mm-hmm. This is a miraculous act, and he is rescued. Or it's an ecstatic vision while he dies. Both are kind of good things. Yeah. But I don't know the answer to which one it is.
Yeah. Well, it's a very, if you feel your life is saved, it's saved. And if you don't feel your life is saved, then it's not saved. And I felt that he felt that his life was saved.
Yeah, it was the intervention of grace into.
Yeah. And yes, sir, back there. He's asking, I'm supposed to repeat the questions, why you chose the ratio to shoot and that you did.
Well, I mentioned before talking to Pavlowski about Ida. Well, Ida is in this format. It's also black and white. So what I said, I thought, I'll do a film like that. I had a delivery requirement that prohibited black and white, but I did keep the format. And it's a good format for a number of reasons. One, of course, it tells the viewer immediately that this is a movie different than other movies, and that there's going to be less of it. So a very primitive kind of withholding device. But also, when you work in that format, the eye is driven into vertical lines much more than horizontal lines. And you really see over and over again the contour of the human body, which is different than the contour of the face. So that is quite striking. But also, another thing happens is that over the shoulders, which is the lingua franca of film today, there weren't many over the shoulders in the old days, in the golden format, because you didn't need them. Just shot, two shot, one. Once the screen format started becoming horizontal, and you had a big head, on either side of the frame, because I didn't want to put it in the center, then you had a hole on the other side of the frame, and so you put a shoulder in there, or you put the side of somebody's face. And now, if you watch television, you're just watching over the shoulders continually. There are no over the shoulders in this film. Now, no one in this audience turned to the person next to them and said, "Oh my God, there are no overs." But you knew that it was different. And it's out of this disconcerting disparity between what you expect and what you're seeing, this unease, that you can start to work with the durational aspects of time. And so that's your answer about the square format.
Would that be what they call Academy?
Well, this is 137. Academy is 133.
Okay. Because they always said the Academy was probably the greatest format for the close-up, for the human face.
But also it's the greatest format for the full figure shot.
Mm-hmm. Which never occurred to me, I have to say. And questions? Observations? Visceral? Yes, sir.
Well, the
gentleman's asking how long Paul had to shoot the film.
That's one of the reasons this film exists now, because it's become so less expensive to make a movie. Anybody can make a movie now. Of course, no one can make money at it, but anyone can make one. And so this film, when I began, would have taken 45 days. I shot it in 20. So it means that in real dollars, this costs half as much as it used to. And so that subject matter that was once financially irresponsible starts to become responsible, because you can say, I can make this in 20 days. Everybody's going to work for less. If it's a film of substance at all, you're going to get your money back. Now, I don't believe that a filmmaker has the obligation to make his backers rich, but I do feel that there is some kind of obligation to return their money if you can. And maybe the reason I never pitched a film like this in the past is I never felt I could convince them that I would return their money. But in this case, at $3 million, 20 days, you'll get your money back.
Yeah, you got a good shot.
Yeah.
The question is, did Paul have Ethan Hawke in mind from the beginning?
No, I mean, I've always, as a writer, when you think of actors, writing makes you a lazy writer. Because you're writing the scene, you hear Al Pacino read the lines, and you say, "Wow, what a great speech." It's not a great speech. Al's a great actor. And so you really try not to put an actor into that image you're creating. You want the actor to come to the script. You don't want the script to come to the actor. And But about halfway through this, I started thinking of a certain physiological type, which is like these priests, like the country priest of Bresson or the Montgomery priest of I Confess. And so I started thinking, Jake Gyllenhaal, Oscar Isaac, Ethan Hawke, and Ethan was 10 years older. And I said, I think this is just the right film for Ethan now. I'd met him over the years, and he's quite, an intelligent man, playwright, a musician, a writer, an actor, a director. And so I sent it to him, and he responded in less than a day.
That's pretty cool. Yes.
Yeah.
So the question is, it seems out of character that this guy would plan to blow up the church and everybody in it.
Yeah.
Would that be inaccurate? Okay, very good.
This man is sick. He has what Kierkegaard called the sickness unto death, despair, angst. He's trying to self-medicate his sickness with prayer, with a journal, with alcohol, with the liturgy of the church. He's not having a lot of luck with that. And then he meets this young kid who's a kind of surrogate of his own dead boy. And he counsels him, and the kid dies, and he catches the virus. Now, I don't know whether he's really a radical environmentalist terrorist or not, but he catches this kid's virus, and all of the selfish, suicidal pathology that he was wallowing in now is suddenly wrapped in the mantle of God's creation. And it elevates his pathology of suicidal glory, into a realm that makes it more acceptable. So it is a kind of delusion that, this is one of the diseases that's built into the DNA of Christianity. Christianity begins as a blood cult in the Old Testament. Slaughter, streets run with blood. A representative figure appears and dies once, and we don't have to sacrifice anymore. But we do have to participate in his blood. We are washed in his blood. There is a fount that flows from Emmanuel's veins. And so it still has the remnants of a blood cult. And when Christians go off the rails, this is often how they go. They get confused between the symbolic sacrifice of Christ and their own sacrifice. And they start thinking that if I suffer enough, my blood will wash me clean. And you'll see this every Easter when people start whipping themselves and nailing themselves on crosses. And so that is it's deeply embedded in the Christian notion. And when Reverend Cedric says to him, God does not want our suffering. He suffered for us. Well, that's the point. But this character is already beyond that, and he is committed to a suffering. So that is how the disease of despair manifests itself in him.
Yeah, I have to comment about the first discussion between the priest and the guy who's going to ultimately kill himself. First of all, I thought it was just a great extended little debate that went on. And I smiled at the character trait of the priest when he basically said in his head, "This is so great." And that was actually really the only moment of levity, that you sort of, but I feel like you allowed it,
Yeah, and of course he doesn't express it on his face.
Right.
And the line that takes him out of that reverie is, the other guy says, "Do you believe in martyrdom?" Mm-hmm. He says, "I'm not sure what you mean," but there it is. It's on the table now.
Yeah.
And martyrdom will, like the vest, martyrdom will out.
Yeah. And anybody? Yes? So the question is, which part of the process does Paul enjoy most? The writing, the shooting, the editing, or does he hate them all?
Fortunately, someone asked that same question to Francois Truffaut years ago. And Truffaut said, when I'm writing, I like directing best. When I'm directing, I like editing best. And when I'm editing, I like writing best. And I think that's the best answer I've heard to that one.
It's pretty good, yeah. I write plays and movies, and every time I'm doing a movie, I'm like, never again. From now on, it's the theater. And when I'm in rehearsal with a show for the theater, I'm like, never again. Only film. I think we all like the back door. We have one eye on the back door. Yes, sir.
Why did I cast Cedric? We have such a propensity to stereotype white men of the cloth. It's just built in. It's a huge problem. You know, the moment you put up a middle-aged white evangelical preacher, it's Jerry Falwell, it's Franklin Graham, it's Pat Robertson, it's Joel Osteen, and all of a sudden they're in a box and the actor can't get out of that box. And you read them so superficially. And I didn't want this megachurch guy to be read that superficially. I had to somehow break that propensity. So I imagined him black and funny. And the casting person said to me, "Now, who is this guy?" I said, "Well, he's kind of like Steve Harvey." And we weren't going to get Steve Harvey, the hardest working man in show business. And so the next day, the casting person came to me and said, "Well, what do you think of Cedric, the entertainer?" And Cedric had, in fact, done serious work. He'd done Mice and Men on stage, and so it wasn't unknown to him. And but I think that he allowed me to keep you, meaning audience, from putting that mega church guy in a stereotyped box.
And so when did you finish writing this script? I'm asking that question in relation to current events.
I had written it before the election, but I had my first meeting with Killer on November 9th. And it was a strange day in this city. People walking around like zombies, bumping into walls, trying to imagine what hell was coming. And now we sort of see it. But yeah, so it wasn't. But obviously, the whole thing about the ecology is not Trump. Mm-hmm. We've made our decision. We human beings, us Homo sapiens, we sort of made our decision already. And it doesn't really matter what Trump's going to do, and he can't undo it. It just matters of how quickly that exponential curve will swing, because once it starts swinging, it's going to swing fast. And I personally see no reason for optimism. I cannot see a scenario whereby Homo sapiens survive this century in the form we now are in. Sorry, children. Sorry, my grandchildren. Sorry we f***ed up. We were wrong. Our parents were the greatest generation. We were the most selfish generation. Sorry. What more can you say?
Well, I think it's important that we don't end there. Do we have another question or oh, yes.
It's just sort of the optimism of the Dutch versus the optimism of the Irish.
Well, I have what they call biological optimism. In other words, I feel good, then I think it's good. If the world's gotten to shit, I'm like, yeah, well, we'll work it out. If I'm not feeling well, it's the end of the world. Yes.
It wasn't in the script.
So the question is the staging of this scene where Cedric spins around in the chair and Ethan is sort of trying to catch his eye but can't quite. Was that in the script?
Now, it wasn't in the script. And And since I'm not allowed to move the camera or pan or tilt the camera, I can't do an expressive camera move that would reflect that reality of this man just saying, you know, here he goes again, and all this stuff about the insects and so while we were location scouting and looking at various offices, one of them had a swivel chair in it, and I made a mental note to myself to make sure we have a swivel chair so he could just swivel away and I don't have to do a camera move.
Now, say just a little more about why you couldn't move the camera.
Because we made that rule. Mm-hmm. And it's a withholding rule. And it's the same thing, another withholding device is not jumping in with the edits. So if I show two people, you know, like in 432, and I don't start jumping in and telling you which one is more important, you then as a viewer have to start saying, am I more interested in who's talking or who's listening? And which is what you do on stage, you get more involved. And so, you know, the locked off camera is a withholding device, but then occasionally you have to break the rule. But you break it in a way that throws people off. So there's that odd shot when the car pulls up and pulls through the frame, and she comes out and she walks camera right, then he enters, then all of a sudden there's a dolly move. Mm-hmm. And I do that, you know, why would I make a rule? Well, I made it so I could break it, but you can only break it once. Then you have to go back to the rule again. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of I just want to say one other thing about withholding devices. Here's the simplest explanation, the most interesting one. When you shoot a scene and somebody enters or exits a room, you cut on action. You cut where the door opens or you cut where the door closes. Now, if you get involved with withholding, you begin with the delayed cut. Now, Bresson was one of the first directors to start using the delayed cut. A guy leaves the room, the door closes, and he holds on the door. 1, 2, 3. Then he cuts. Now, this is not what your eye would do. Your eye doesn't stay watching the door after someone exits. It finds something else to watch. But here, you as a viewer are being told by the director, you have to watch this door. Well, what's happening? It's not nothing. Something is happening. But it's no longer about the door. It's about the time you spend watching it. And that is how you can manipulate people by using boredom as a scalpel. And it's a very dangerous scalpel because if you use it wrong, everybody gets up and leaves. But if you use it right, they can go to a place that they don't usually go.
Yes, yes. I mean, because I think you use that device very well, whereas, like for instance, in the reboot of Twin Peaks, I'm like, okay, you're abusing my attention span. I know that may be the wrong thing to say, but you know, and I admire a lot of the things that David Lynch does. But one of the things that I did not admire about the reboot of Twin Peaks was the way that he would just let the audience hang for so long that we were in danger of walking away, and we were in danger of other people using the device no longer effective because it had been used in this way. Well, I wondered if that would prompt you to say anything.
No, I mean, you're talking about the guy cleaning up at the bar, I mean, which is kind of, but that, you know, episode 8, they're going into Stan Bracken's Bruce Conner land was kind of extraordinary.
Yeah.
But the thing about withholding devices is, you know, it's so easy to abuse them. And directors who work on the slow side or the contemplative side, you know, starting with Antonioni and Mizoguchi and Ginesco and all the way up to the current directors, they look at this buffet of techniques, and no two of them uses the same elements in the same proportion. So you don't actually get two films that work the same way. Some people say, oh, you know, Bellatar says, I'm going to do the incremental lateral pan, And then other directors said, no, I'm not Pan, I mean Dolly. And then others, no, I'm not going to do that, And so each artist finds his own little formula for withholding, and some of them are more successful than others. And some of them move you more than others.
Well, I had dinner at Paul's apartment about 3.5 years ago, and you said, I'm thinking about doing something about this Calvinist church kind of thing that I, swore I would never do. And then, cut to 3.5 years later, and you did it. Congratulations.
Oh, thank you.
Wonderful stuff. Wonderful stuff.
Thanks for listening to another DGA Q&A. If you'd like to hear more, you can find past episodes of The Director's Cut wherever you listen to podcasts. In the coming weeks, we'll hear from directors Jay Chandrasekhar and Morgan Neville, so be sure to click subscribe so you won't miss an episode. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time. This podcast is produced by the Directors Guild of America. Music is by Dan Wally.